All right. Welcome back to Firewall. I'm your host, Bradley Tusk. Today is a couple things. So one is this really kind of groundbreaking poll just came out, and we're here with both the creator and author of the poll and the guy who paid for it, and we're going to talk through what the poll says and what it means. It is also the inaugural episode of something that Tom Allon and I are doing together. Tom is the publisher of City and State and kind of a longtime New York media legend. And he and I are going to interview pretty much all the candidates for mayor. And so we thought, given the amount of research that Jamie and John did here, it was a good way to kick things off. So two guests, John Della Volpe, I think a lot of you might know already, but he's the director of polling at the Kennedy School at Harvard's Institute of Politics, wrote a great book called Fight, How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. He runs a polling company called SocialSphere. Jamie is a lot of things. Listeners of this podcast sort of know him pretty well because he's both been on, and I talk about him sometimes. He is a venture capitalist, a former private equity guy. He is the chairman of the New York City Housing Authority. He was the COO for the state of New York under Governor Cuomo and was also the head of the Hurricane Sandy task force recovery. Did I miss anything, Jamie?
Yeah, no, that's
pretty much it.
I mean,
a bunch of civic stuff. So, so I guess the first question, Jamie, let me throw it to you, which is, you, out of your pocket, chose to commission this poll and pay for it. You're not a candidate. You're not working with any candidates. You're not a special interest. So why?
I'm special, and I'm interested.
Sure.
Maybe that's not the same thing. I mean, the highest level answer is because I care about New York. I've lived here my whole life, like you have, mostly. And given where New York is, which I think we all agree is sort of a bit of a tipping point, it seemed to me that this mayoral election and the city council elections, and all of them basically this year, are probably very, very, very important for the direction we take in the next bunch of years. So I wanted to get a sense for myself of what I thought most polls don't get to, which is how does a broad cross-section of people really feel about key issues, and what do they feel like the key issues are in New York? That was sort of thing one.
Yeah.
Thing two was, let's see if I could find somebody really good who could get below the surface of those questions and get some understanding of not only how people feel about the key issues, but what they would be willing and actually want their leaders to do about them with some specifics. So it's not just, I care about housing or whatever, and I want more housing. It's, what would I really be willing to see the city do to solve the problem that I seem to care about the most? You very rarely, if ever, get that out of public opinion surveys, and I thought there must be somebody who could do that. So that was kind of the two key things that I was looking for. I have some other thoughts about what might happen as a result of that, but we can talk about that later.
Sure. I mean, so what does it tell us about the city? What are some of the big highlines?
Well, John can talk more about the specifics of the findings if he'd like, but my take on it was a couple of things. One, people are, let's say a broad cross-section of people, and John, I should say, one of the things that John will talk about, I'm sure, that he did that you don't get in most things, is he grouped the respondents in very interesting ways. So you're not just getting peanut butter spread across everybody. You actually have some understanding of an electoral path through some of these issues. But anyway, let's say a lot of people care about the things that you would expect they care about. They're concerned about the city. They're concerned about public safety writ large, and with some specifics, particularly the subways. They are quite concerned about the appearance of that there's a lot of, the streets are much more liable to have people with apparently serious mental illnesses than they have seen in the past. And more than anything else, they care about housing and housing affordability, which is not a surprise to me, but I thought it was interesting that it was really, I would say, the single biggest finding of this. Of the surveys.
And John, explain a little bit like why this poll was different, because I think most people listening are obviously aware of polling, but in terms of the scope, the sample size, the focus groups, why this is something that probably merits a lot of study and attention because it's just so different.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to do this work, and I think the timing of it was really important for me. Jamie and I started talking about this probably in mid to late November, I think, right? Coming out of the presidential cycle, where to me the big takeaway from a national viewpoint was we're just not listening to people, right? That that my advice for any of us who care about like civic engagement politics isn't about whether we need to be tacking left or to right. It's about being closer to people. Okay. And then when Jamie called and said, how would you envision conducting this kind of research in New York City? I immediately said, I can't assume that I even know the questions to ask. Right. So we were very fortunate to be able to conduct 12 focus groups, from December through early January. Half a dozen of them were in the city where I moderated and facilitated. Another 6 were conducted online. And to me, that is the essential part of any meaningful public opinion project. Because to me, it wasn't just about, do we ask this question or that question, is I wanted to kind of capture kind of the emotion of people and the real, kind of pain so many people were feeling about living in a city, growing up in a city, and being, in their view, forced to have to think about leaving. It was devastating for people.
I was struck at how pessimistic the results were. I mean, I've lived in New York since 1962 when I was born here, and it's starting to feel like the 80s again. And I really, I thought we had gotten past that in the 2000s and 2010s, but the pessimism in New York now is shocking, and it's coming through in the survey.
And Tom, so you obviously talk to lots of people. You're about as connected as anyone I know. One, does that reflect anecdotally what you see? And two, do you think that, and this is the value of the research, people like you or me or Jamie are sort of in a bubble, political bubble in New York, right? So we kind of talk to each other. Do you think there's a disparity between what insiders like us think and what the public thinks?
I think people in general are angry at their leaders, and that's been going on for a number of years. I think since COVID, and maybe even slightly before COVID, I think everybody's disappointed in the leadership that they see both on the city level, the state level, the national level. And I think that reflects, that is some of the color of the pessimism that people have. And when they see things being chaotic in New York, they have people to blame. There's an old Ed Koch saying when he was mayor, he said, if a bird dies in Queens, they blame me. And I think people in this generation particularly like to have somebody to blame.
Yeah. So John, you poll all over the country. Is what Tom just said and what you found from the polling, is New York unique, or are we part of a much larger sort of societal trend?
I think New York is probably the leading edge of a national, perhaps global societal trend. Tom, the number of times unprompted in the focus groups where people mention the return to Gotham, right, and the concerns about that were striking. And a lot of it was connected to the challenges that Jamie mentioned in terms of housing accessibility, right, and forcing people to do things that they otherwise might not do. Part one. Part two is just the lack of seeming kind of concern or response, from city government, from the mayor's office. One of the many bright spots of the survey was the degree to which everyday New Yorkers want to make their city better. Okay, that near the end of the survey, near the end of the focus groups and the qualitative, I would actually try to work with people to help me design policies that they could support, and they think that would kind of make sense. And it was all about, we want to have more interactions like the ones that we're having, right? Where everyday New Yorkers could talk with a facilitator, preferably someone from the mayor's office, or from city government, who could actually kind of work within the neighborhood. So yes, we see over a quarter of New Yorkers who have made plans or seriously thinking about leaving the city, but I don't think that they necessarily want to. They feel like the city is, again, kind of letting them down, and they were there for the city, and they feel like the city isn't, unfortunately, there for them when times are hard like they are today.
So let's just jump into the first thing that obviously everyone always wants to know, which is the horse race, right? It's sort of what everyone sort of enjoys most in politics. So John, walk us through what the race, two things. One, what the race itself looks like, but two, maybe before you do that, as Jamie mentioned, you segmented the voters in a way that I think is really unique and interesting. So maybe you're thinking of what you did on that first.
Sure thing. Well, I think first of all, there's no shortage of high quality horse race polls in the city, right? Some private, some public. That was not the main objective of this. The main objective of this, I think for us, Jamie, right, was to listen to New Yorkers, empower their voices. Ideally, we could, if the issues that they care about were raised by elected officials and campaigns, more young people, more everyday New Yorkers, more older people would vote and participate. That's the way in which I kind of designed this. We found actually two, to me, remarkable findings. I am as proud of this research as any other project I've done in quite a while. We found that there's three dimensions to New York politics. Okay, the first of which is that rather than this traditional left-right, conservative, progressive, or liberal, we find that the three dimensions defining politics today are the following. First of which is public safety, crime, and transit concerns. Okay, that is one group of issues driving a lot of the conversation and the debate at the local level. Second is the self-described kind of progressives and their concerns about housing advocacy, okay, is a second. And the third of which is the local focus and civic engagement. Okay, so these are the three buckets essentially of issues that New Yorkers are caring about. What's really interesting though is when we take those and we look at, again, through this lens of not identity, not race or ethnicity or sexuality, et cetera, but we look at it through the lens of politics, we find 5 communities of New York voters, okay? And I think the candidate who's gonna be most successful, Bradley, is the one who can kind of transcend each of these cohorts.
Yep.
One, we talked a little bit earlier about, do you think, that folks like us are represented, in terms of, college degree and connected with politics, et cetera. And one of, to me, of the more interesting cleavages within the city is within the progressive community, right? That we found that roughly 41%, okay, pretty comfortable in the progressive community, but roughly half of them I call reform progressives and the other half pragmatic progressives, right? And understand the life experience which is driving these decisions between the pragmatic and the reform progressives is really, really interesting. And specifically that the reform progressives don't have the same interest or connection to the crime in city that other groups do. It is far less prominent in their lives and far less prominent.
Can I ask you a question? Or is it can't be because criminals are like, oh, I'm not going to mug this person, they're really progressive. Is it just that they believe so deeply in their issues that they are actually willing to say, like, well, this person was probably a victim of institutional racism, discrimination, so therefore I'm not going to blame them, and that's just a fact of life?
I can just tell you from personal experience, I have a 26-year-old daughter who fits into that category. I mean, anybody that's in jail shouldn't be there. There shouldn't be jails, and they're there because of institutional racism. And I would call her one of your...
What happened to your parenting?
I have 4 kids, and I'm proud of each of them. But and she's a passionate lefty. I was a little bit like that at her age too. Some of it is, I think, age, but I think that's the way she feels. To her, Zohran Mamdani is the second coming. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a cohort of young people in the city who feel the same way she does. Right. There's a big ceiling, there's a small ceiling there, I think.
Yeah, it's good news for Cuomo. So the first 2 groups, John, I just want to get through, are the reform progressives and then the pragmatic progressives.
Yes. And the only thing I'd say is it's not just based upon how they think about policy, it's based upon the lived experience too, right? And they have a different just lived experience. The next couple, okay, is a group I call the frustrated middle. Okay, the discontented strivers, and all of this, by the way, is online through Jamie's website, through ours, and we're going to do everything we can to elevate this. The frustrated middle, it's about 29%, close to a third. This is the most ethnically diverse. They're distributed across all of the boroughs, and they're extremely concerned about crime. 85% say it's a major problem. They're very concerned about transit reliability. On a weekly basis, they're late for something because of this. And of course, 91% are concerned about housing, okay? And then we've got the traditional outer borough voter, which is only 10%. but they're relatively small, but they're really driving the attitudes within their boroughs. So it's a small, but I think very mighty group, middle-aged, again, very diverse, concentrated in Queens. They registered as Democrats, but they're pretty conservative on a lot of other issues. And then we have a group which is about a fifth, I call the law and order conservatives, right? The security seekers. They're going to be older, predominantly white, predominantly, in Queens and in Brooklyn, mixed education. Their views of the mayor are mixed and not as harshly negative as others. And again, public safety and transit reliability are top concerns. So we talk about these 5 groups, not to necessarily divide, but to understand and provide opportunities for candidates to kind of to touch upon their values and speak to them over the course of the next several months.
So when Eric Adams won in 2021, where do you think he captured within those 5 groups the most votes? And then 2, why, your polls show that only 12% of people think he should be reelected. Let me be clear, that's a different number than who you're going to vote for. It's just objectively, this is the person, do you want them back or not? And 88% effectively, one way or another, said no. So 1, who were the groups that put him in office? And then 2, what happened?
I mean, I'll speak up and then maybe John has views. I think the people that put him in office were probably the last group, for sure, because if I remember correctly, there wasn't anybody else who sort of fit that, who chose that lane, right? Who came in second? Was Garcia ultimately?
Garcia she was very close. Yeah.
Pragmatic or something, but not law and order pragmatic.
No,
and Eric was just a different.
She was
lane.
operational,
super competent, all that kind of stuff, but not a vision. And he, for whatever reason, I think you would say he certainly had a vision. He picked a lane, and that was where he went.
So it's kind of groups 3, 4, and 5 that John said.
I would have thought something like that. I don't think it was the young progressive people.
No, and I think the pragmatic progressives, they were the Garcia Brooklyn Brownstone voters, right?
Yeah.
So Tom, you worked on the Adams campaign.
Right.
Well, not
Or
officially.
you were involved. You advised it.
I was an unofficial advisor.
Okay, so who, from your sense, who were your voters?
I mean, I think of things demographically a little bit differently. I think Eric knitted together that classic Black Latino coalition, and the Law and Order coalition, I think, is what put him over the top. So I think that's really was his sweet spot. And I think we saw on the presidential level too. It was the Black male and Latino male community that really swung to the Republicans. I think there's going to be a backlash this time, and Eric hasn't, unfortunately, proven the competence that group demands.
Right. So, John, let's first just start with the horse race and then paths. So, just in terms of how the people responded, who's ahead?
Yeah, so clearly Cuomo has an advantage at this moment. We, again, use this opportunity to show a different dimension, okay, to the horse race and preferences. This wasn't a message testing poll. We didn't do a lot of favorability or approval ratings. We want to get a sense in terms of how open at this early stage of the campaign that voters across the city were open to a variety of candidates, okay? So again, this is a technique we've used in other places, early stages of the campaign, because we want to see also kind of where the different cohorts might be and where some coalitions could be kind of developed, okay? Regardless, I think what we see in our polling is what you see reflective in other more traditional horse race polling. And at this stage, 39-40% say that they are definitely going to vote for Andrew Cuomo, or there's a good chance they will vote for him, okay? So that 2 out of 5 likely Democratic primary voters is essentially.
Can I ask a methodological question? So your sample is about 5x your normal kind of horse race sample. Does that, in your view, make it even more likely, or do you think statistically in terms of that and how you look at the horse race, it's the same thing?
Well, I think at the top level, it's more or less the same. The reason that we did so many voters is, again, we want to give voice, okay, to as many different subgroups who make up the city as possible. So Bradley, we can go a little bit deeper, right, to say what it's like with men versus women, but also by borough, by all the other kind of dimensions that are interesting.
Did those people that you surveyed, were they clued into the mayoral race yet? Because it seems like a big part of the electorate is not engaged yet.
I think generally I would agree with that. Certainly in the focus groups of December and January, and that's also one of the reasons, again, at this early stage, we want to see, are you open? Do you strongly support someone? Do you strongly oppose someone, right? So what we found, again, basically the strongly support Cuomo is 20%. Okay, which is 2 to 3x. Okay, the strongly support other candidates. And then what we found was with Adams, the strongly oppose
It's huge.
is well over 50%. It's like 3 and 5 strongly oppose. Under no circumstances will they vote for him, and that number is reflected, throughout the entire survey, right? Based upon, kind of the intensity of response to are you listening to the direction of the city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Et cetera.
So I want to play a little bit of a process of elimination game with the candidates. And in this case, Tom, you're a respondent, and I want your views on this as well as Jamie's and John's, which is, John, if I understand your 5 groups correctly, and I've been, you were nice enough to brief me on them, so I have a pretty good sense of it. You obviously need no one of them is big enough to win the election, so you need to sort of stitch them together, as Tom said a minute ago. And I want to go through all the candidates or the major ones and just see who we think realistically can do that in the right way. So let's start with Eric Adams, and the answer might here just be, absent something radically changing, is there enough support for him to win again?
No.
Okay.
Just think.
Right.
By the way, I think Tom and I may be the last people. Well, let's see what Tom says.
Let's see. He opened his mouth in a way that maybe seemed like he sees it differently.
I think today, if the election were held today, he's dead in the water. However, I can see a scenario where he runs as a third-party candidate. He gets a long enough time to rehabilitate his image, and this is a big if, the president decides that he wants to, shower favors on New York because of Eric Adams to get him reelected. It's a triple bank shot.
And and in this scenario, who's the Democratic nominee?
Cuomo.
So you're not saying it has to be Lander or somebody?
No, I think
because that would improve the odds, right? I would vote for Adams probably over Lander as an independent.
Oh yeah. But I think Adams is right now. Listen, there's a question of whether he's even running. I mean, he's not showing a lot of indication of
campaigning.
So I think
or petitioning.
I think he might be.
I think
he said he's start campaigning this week. But I see a scenario where he just hangs back and decides to run in the general.
Right. Just so we can cut some of this out if it's too much, but on this particular subject. But Tom and I had lunch, I think it was like a month ago or something, and we agreed that we were the only 2 people either one of us knew who actually thought Eric was going to win. Now, this was it's probably more like 2 months. This was I think it was pre the prosecutorial stuff.
Yeah. Pre-Trump.
And pre-Trump, basically pre-Trump. And although he was definitely courting him.
Yes.
But I still felt like, all other things being equal, what the hell?
And John, you see any path for Eric Adams?
I perhaps the third party, the third way approach, but
so basically,
it's intense.
Democratic Party.
So now we'll do Cuomo last. Let's go. There's a group of candidates that I think all have tried very hard to appeal to that first group, the Reform Progressive. So that would be, for sure, Lander, Mondami, Myrie, Ramos, and then Stringer's a little bit of a hybrid. It seems to me that for a candidate to win like that, they have to get those 2 groups that John mentioned, the Reform Progressives and the Pragmatic Progressives. Both have to support you. I think it worked really well for, say, Bill de Blasio in 2013, because when the city feels safe and well run, and after Mike Bloomberg it was, voters can say, well, what about social justice? What about affordable housing? And they can kind of expand the remit of their interests. And because things seem fine, they don't really feel compelled to sort of vote on quality of life and safety issues. Given that things do not feel fine right now at all in the polling, as Tom mentioned, it was you were surprised at how pessimistic it was.
Sean.
Is there a path where one of those 5 people, John, can bring those 2 groups together?
The path has to begin with a clear articulation of just not their values, but a proven record of getting things done. Okay? Because New Yorkers, what they say in the focus groups, what they say in their survey is they talk to a lot of people with a lot of ideas. Many of them sound great, but what they're looking for now is the pragmatic part of progressivism. So listen, I am not an expert in the inner workings, of New York City politics. So others can speak to that aspect of it, but if there's one of those candidates who has an executive level of experience getting things done that can be then translated to the kind of the broader issues, then the answer would be yes. But that's what it's going to take.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the overriding issue is executive competence. But I will say there's one wild card. Every day I talk to New Yorkers who are getting angrier and angrier about what's happening on the national level. And the candidate that's able to sort of articulate that rage, and I think so far Zoran Mamdani, who's a very impressive young guy. His mother is a famous film director. He's putting out videos that are like...
She is?
Mira Nair.
Oh, really?
Salam Bombay.
I had no idea.
My brother was a college roommate of her first husband's, who happened to be Jewish, actually, Mitch Epstein. So Zoran Mamdani is the son of a very famous film director.
Mississippi Masala.
Salam Bombay, So,
right,
but what I'm saying is his ability to communicate and communicate through videos, like short videos that my kids watch.
Yeah.
But Tom, doesn't that in a weird way actually say, therefore the answer is, if my question was, can someone unite the two groups? No, because so Zoran, of that first group that John mentioned, which is around 20% of the electorate, I think you're right. Your daughter, he could do really well. The next group, which is liberal but does not want to get mugged and sort of feels really shitty right now, which is the next 25%. If you accept John's point that they want someone with some kind of proven track record, he's
Absolutely.
a state rep. He has no track.
No, he has no, and few of the candidates do. I mean, really, arguably, Scott and Brad Lander and Andrew Cuomo are the only ones.
Yeah, so Jamie, do you think, so we know that the two state senators and Zoran don't have the kind of track record John's talking about. Scott and Brad Lander were both controller. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is sufficient in the minds of the voters to sort of meet the criteria John laid out, or no?
I mean, I think it helps because at least you can say you've run something that has more than 3 people.
Scott was borough president too.
Scott was, I mean,
that is 3 people.
I don't know.
Yes.
That actually, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, not even you think that that's a real job. But
no, but there's been more of a path to mayor from there.
You've had 2.
Yes. For sure. Yes, absolutely. No, I think it probably does help. It helps. I would imagine it helps if you can articulate. I mean, and this is not I'm not being snarky about this. If you can actually articulate what the comptroller does,
right,
and and make it sound like the comptroller had an impact on something. It's not just
exactly
the audits.
So don't you think? So Bill Thompson, John Liu, Alan Hevesy, Jay Golden. I'm forgetting 1 or 2 more, but like basically every comptroller runs for mayor,
except
with
for
the exception of Abe Beam, who was a one-term failure.
Yes.
Ironically, on fiscal issues,
Right.
they all lost. So doesn't history say that even if you, because everyone just named, they're smart people and they had good polls and whatever else,
Sure.
and yet none of them could articulate it in a way that was compelling to voters.
Well, sure. I mean, but then not to dig too deep into it, but yes. But I would say that let's talk. Each of them has a specific situation that maybe was an issue. So John Liu obviously had some other issues. I would say
financial.
But
Jay Golden was a serious person, but he was the zero politician.
I covered that.
Hevesy's issues didn't emerge till after his mayoral race, so that wasn't.
Fine.
It didn't sink him then. Bill Thompson, certainly nice guy. He's a friend of yours,
For sure. None of them had personalities really, and I.
Do you think Lander and Stringer do?
Not really. No.
Right.
I'm. That's why you become controller.
Bill is. Anyway, we don't have to debate the merits of
Bill has more of a
By the
personality.
way, John Liu had a personality.
He does.
Yes.
John Liu does have a personality.
He's actually a good politician.
And Bill Thompson too, actually, to a certain extent.
They're great.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, guys. 14% of New Yorkers think we're headed in the right direction.
14%.
14%. 22% feel hopeful or optimistic about building a future. Okay.
Did you ask that same question about on the national level or no?
I don't think we did it on the national
okay.
level. They're more optimistic about their own neighborhood.
Okay.
So this is not a traditional race here.
Right,
okay.
right.
We need someone in New York who can kind of marshal the support of these constituencies that we talk to, because people are down. They're thinking about riots in the streets. Okay. And urban decay and a return to Gotham. Right. Thousands of people today are thinking about where they move to and how they get out of here. That's where we're thinking, right?
But
so we need someone bigger, right?
There used to be, a Rolling Stone commercial called Perception Reality. The perception of the city is so much different than the reality of the city. I mean, if you look at the crime statistics in the last 2 or 3 months, crime's going down pretty steadily. And crime has gone down since Eric took over as mayor. Right. I take the subways every day. They're better than they were a year ago.
Absolutely.
I got that subway every day too. I think maybe slightly, but I wouldn't say a lot.
A year ago, I had 2 or 3 scary incidents on the subway. I have not had one since then. I'm not saying they're great.
Right. And also, it's very idiosyncratic, right? You could have the one negative one, and that
Yes.
colors your view completely.
Yes, absolutely. But the city is not going to hell like I think a lot of people do. I think the narrative has gotten away from Eric Adams. The mass resignations, the cozying up to the president, his comms policy has always been terrible. The media hates him. So that's why I think the electorate's so angry.
But I think there's another piece of this, which, John, would be interesting. What you think about this as a sort of in general, what you've seen in other places as well. One of the things I think that Eric did was he got elected with partly because he was arguing that the city had problems that were like this.
Yes.
That's why he convinced people that they needed somebody who was a law and order guy. And then, for whatever reason, he wasn't able to convince them quickly that he solved it. If you convince them you solved it, then presumably you get a lot more benefit. And this, he had all kinds of other issues.
Right.
Andrew Cuomo, since we haven't talked about him yet, but Andrew is repeatedly making the same case. We're a city in crisis. Only I can fix it, which
Sounds familiar.
Only I can fix it. I'm Andrew Cuomo. You can see why he is making that argument given who he's running against. And Harry Siegel, to give him credit, wrote a column about this exact point this last week, I think. He said, look, A, the city's really not in crisis, sort of your point, Tom, and B, there's a danger in making that argument because it's a bummer. It's not there's no forward-looking vision there. And maybe it sets a trap for you. Like if the city's in crisis and we elect you and you don't get to it real fast, which I think is what we're seeing on the national level.
Although what Tom said actually might also be the sort of blessing in disguise, which is if the perception is worse than the reality and a change in leadership and that person is a strong leader can usher in a feeling that things are different, they might actually benefit disproportionately. So on Cuomo, the first question would be, do we think that voters think, okay, this guy can get stuff done? I would imagine the fact that he's sitting at 40%, John would say that they do think that, right?
Yeah, and the technocratic aspect of his background seemed to resonate in the focus groups. Again, I don't know. In the focus groups, we had some very we saw a lot of intensity around his name, right? And many people, especially the progressive piece, right, the reform progressives, want really nothing to do with him, looking for a new generation for all those obvious reasons. But I was struck at what the response was from a lot of other New Yorkers who appreciated his transparency during the COVID days, right? Because they're looking for someone who is available to kind of answer questions, and of course they can't deny how much he enjoys and lives and loves the kind of the city. Those are a couple of those things. So again, the question of the technocratic part of it, the debate around crime, bail reform, et cetera, all of that I'm sure kind of will be coming. Right. But I do think that he probably transcends 4 of those 5 groups probably pretty well at this point. Right.
So the anti-Cuomo, and I want to save you for a separate question in a second, is argument we see is, well, when the voters are reminded of his different scandals, why he had to leave office, nursing homes, whatever, then their view is going to change. And it seems to me in many ways that the central question of this entire race is, have the voters who are picking Cuomo in your survey, John, or anyone else's, are they already aware of it and it's all baked in, or do they genuinely not remember it?
I think a lot of people have forgotten. And I think one big factor in this race that was a huge factor in 21 is the New York Post. Even though we say the media has been defanged in America, the New York Post has outsized influence, particularly in mayoral elections. And I've seen the Post be pretty harsh with Cuomo the last 2 weeks or so since he got into the race. They were the opposite with Eric Adams back in 21. They literally, it seemed like the whole editorial staff and the editorial board was behind him, and there was negative stories about his opponents. If the New York Post decides they don't want Andrew Cuomo to be mayor, he's got a more uphill battle than it looks like.
So do you think, okay, so obviously I'm leading question.
But they don't have an alternative.
That's the question. So where do they go?
They don't have an alternative. That's why I think they're going to probably pull their punches with him eventually.
You think that even in the primaries? You don't think they'll just in the primaries they'll just say like we don't want.
I mean,
listen,
Well, but then that ends up
Curtis
doing
Lewa.
nothing.
Curtis Lewa is their alternative in the general, and I don't
well,
think
at the
they'll-
moment, but I mean, somebody else. You don't think anybody else
No.
emerges?
I mean, Curtis has already gotten the 5 borough chairs
I don't
endorsement.
think
I mean, the Republican Party seems to have given up. They have a great opportunity this year to actually have a candidate who has a chance.
Interesting.
So the other one is the New York Times announced a year ago, whatever it was, hey, we're not doing local endorsements anymore, which seemed crazy to me because no one cares who they endorse for president, but actually they do listen to the local stuff. There was a little bit of scuttlebutt the last week or so that maybe they're reconsidering that.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
Do anyone hear that or think that?
I had heard that they were reconsidering some of their endorsement policies, but not specific to New York.
Right, because if they were to, obviously, part of why Catherine Garcia came so close was she got that Times endorsement. If they were to anoint Stringer or Lander or someone that could make a difference.
But historically, they haven't made a difference, to be honest. When you look back, I mean, they Christine Quinn got
Yep,
all the
true.
endorsements, and she didn't go anywhere.
Yep. So why do you think it worked so well for Garcia?
Because it was kind of a confluence of the Times, the News, and she became the alternative to Eric. You know, somebody's going to break out of the pack and become the alternative to Andrew Cuomo, and she happened to be at the right time, right place at the right time.
Yep. All right, so I want to jump now. I mean, there's a ton of findings in this survey, and we probably need a 5-hour podcast to cover them all. I picked out 4 that were particularly interesting to me, but of course we can take this any direction you guys want. The first one is an issue that I know Jamie feels very passionately about, which is New York City controlling its own subways and buses. Jamie does not like this. So, Tom, you mentioned a few minutes ago, Koch had that joke saying, I don't know, if a bird dies in Queens, I get blamed for it. One thing I've always felt is the mayor ought to run the subways and buses because the mayor has no political cover for the fact that the MTA actually runs it because every New Yorker thinks the mayor runs it. And then when I was running my Bloomberg campaign in 2009, I tried very hard to convince him to make mayoral control of subways and buses the centerpiece of our campaign, and he disagreed with me and didn't do it. But given that you take all of the downsides for it anyway, it seems to me to be logical for a mayor to think about it. So 79% of respondents said they liked the idea. So start with John. Did that surprise you?
That was 79% of any political slice of electorate is considerable. It's a very high number. I don't know if it surprised me or not, but there's a series of really strong numbers in this survey related to how to move forward.
So tell us what those are.
So, for example, if we just focus on transportation, and by the way, most people don't feel safe, right? We know that, but 85% of New Yorkers, nearly 9 out of 10, believe in increasing the police presence patrolling the subway system. Okay, 82%, including half of the progressive reformers, believe strongly or somewhat strongly in police removing homeless people who live in the subway. 79% believe the police should strongly enforce quality of life violations, including against smoking and excessive noise. Generally, if we see, 2 out of 5, half or 3 out of 5, that's something you can kind of build some consensus on. But this is where New Yorkers are at this moment. And as I said, even the progressive reformers are close to half, whereas the other groups are 80, 90% there. We have other issues kind of as well, but those are the 3 of the big ones that just kind of pop out and say, okay, if New York is going to take over, this is what needs to happen in their view.
But the thing is, the mayor has no control over the purse strings for the MTA, but he does have control over public safety in the MTA. I wrote a column 2 years ago suggesting that the mayor put 1 policeman on every subway car patrolling up and down. A couple days later, the mayor actually floated that idea, and it was vehemently attacked by the head of the PBA at the time. Pat Lynch said it was too dangerous to put 1 cop. You have to put 2 cops. And the mayor buckled at that point. That's what Eric Adams did when he was a transit cop. He walked up and down the subways. 55% of crime happens on subway cars. When's the last time you saw a cop on a subway car? They're either on the platform or 3 of them are looking at their phones at the toll gate. And I can't tell you how many people, and I'm sure in your survey this has come up, tell me that they can't stand seeing cops congregating on their phones. The mayor runs a small military of 33,000 policemen, and so does the commissioner. They're not deployed properly. If you had 1 cop walking up and down every subway car in the city 24/7, I guarantee you people would feel a lot differently about their rides on the subways.
Do we need to stipulate here that we all respect and love the police?
I love the police.
Okay, there we go.
No, but
Just to be clear.
I agree with Tommy. You see that. So
Yeah.
one of the things I also thought was noteworthy in the survey was you guys asked a question about congestion pricing and redirecting the revenue from it specifically to making subways safer, cleaner, putting up gates that really can't be gone under or over or anything else. What was the response to that?
That was something too that solid majority, 59, 60%, I think, kind of supported that. And I think the other kind of aspect of this is that New Yorkers are trying to be both thoughtful, but they're trying to be very thoughtful about this, and they understand that these are mental health concerns that are being unaddressed as well, right? And what they're asking for and what we can see here and measure is the degree to which they would really like, increasing levels of coordination between police and mental health care professionals. And I think my own personal point of view is if mental health, and not just of those most challenged that New Yorkers are kind of interacting with on the subways and the streets, okay, but also the stress and the anxiety that other New Yorkers are feeling on a regular basis, I believe if there was a candidate who focused on the importance of mental health, that would be something that I think could separate them perhaps from the rest of the pack. It is a more significant political issue than most people appreciate. It's something that I've been thinking about and surveying and seeing strong results for a handful, almost a decade.
Well, particularly in your youth cohorts, I assume. No?
Certainly with youth, but across.
So so contrast that or not with one of the findings that I thought was a little surprising was 89% said they support involuntary confinement of the mentally ill. Right? So 89% said if someone is mentally ill and potentially a threat to themselves or others, whether they want it or not, they can be removed forcibly and put somewhere in a facility. For a very liberal city like New York, that struck me as a very high number. Does that undermine what you just said, John, or does that fit with it?
I think it fits with it. That was striking. Okay, yeah. That was striking, and I believe, again, through a lot of the conversation, that there's an empathy to that. It wasn't to get that number, Bradley, right? You're not going to just have the law and order conservatives, support that. Right. This can be something that translates. Now, complicated, expensive, perhaps probably not even legal. I don't know, but that's where people are.
This has been a perennial issue in New York. I mean, in the early 1990s, the newspaper that I was running, the West Side Spirit, covered a case of a guy on West 96th Street who was attacking people on the streets because he was on crack. He'd get put in Bellevue, dried out, came back in the streets and would attack people. And as a result of that, they changed.
Larry?
Larry Hogue, the wild man of West 96th
Larry
Street.
Hogue, my God.
That was my papers. We broke that story 60 minutes. Picked it up, and that's when involuntary things started being discussed. I'm not sure when we ever went away from that.
Well, I think we went away through. There was litigation. We had Kendra's law, obviously, which is allows you to do that under some circumstances. There was a lot of litigation around it. I want to say it was Koch, but there was a deinstitutionalization thanks to litigation, right? Which shoved a lot of people out the door, and you can't keep beds open.
If you remember Joyce Brown,
100%, right? So there's now one of the issues you've got is that you don't have enough beds. I mean, literally don't have the space for these folks. So that's something you need to address. But I think I agree with you. I didn't take from that number that it was a lack of compassion. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I don't think it's that people were like, get rid of them and just send them off somewhere. Rudy Giuliani's Fort Orange, solution. But I think it was much more just nothing else seems to have worked. All of the other stuff we've tried has not worked. It's sort of back to the managerial competence issue. This is what's going to work.
And listen, again, I don't want to sound like I'm a defender of the mayor, but he's the first mayor in my lifetime who took on this issue and tried compassionately to get the homeless mentally ill off the streets.
But that's one of the frustrating things about him is that he has, I think, my view, have been places where he has actually said something like that and tried to act on something like in the way that you would hope he would.
And there have been
some
firm. Results.
I know he's firm, and he strikes the right note. He does seem to emit some compassion. But there's all kinds of other problems, but that is a problem. I mean, whereas Bill de Blasio we remember well, and his wife, whose name I can't remember anymore, Charlene, famously took all of the mental health programs that the city had, bundled them into one thing that they gave them.
Thrive.
What was
$1 billion
This is, because mental health. They said mental health is a huge issue. Great. Unfortunately, they did it in a way that completely undercut all of its legitimacy.
Right.
So another number that surprised me, but maybe it's sort of consistent with what you guys were all just saying, which was 55% of the voters said they support the city feeding and housing the migrants. And I have to say that surprised me, because I really would have thought that, given how frustrated people seem to be about illegal immigration, about the migrant crisis, Trump getting 30% in New York City, that I really would have thought that would be different. What do you guys think?
I'd be curious to see the breakdown neighborhood by neighborhood, because if your neighborhood's not, if I don't see migrants in Dumbo, I'm sure there are many neighborhoods in the city that don't see the migrants. It's not part of their sort of daily.
Right.
I think I would be one of those 55% saying
Well, let's. Oh, let me see what John. Let's see what John says about this.
So the 55% is divided, right? So we talk. So like most of the other issues we've been talking about, and there are others, as I said, shockingly, you get 70, 80% plus support. Shockingly, okay? This is more complex. So if we break down that 55%, 21% say yes, the city should continue providing housing and food to all new migrants. But a third say yes, but with stricter limits on how migrants receive aid. And then you have 27% say no, the city should only provide basic emergency services, with 16% saying nothing. Okay, so that is, I think it's a complex issue.
Right.
You know, honestly, we only had the one question. Okay, but we can in the focus groups, we can feel the impact that folks believe it's having to their own scarce resources, right? Again, there's an empathy, there's this resiliency and this empathy and the connection that so many New Yorkers have with this community. But again, it's something that I think there are bigger divisions than even that 55% might illustrate.
And that rings about right to me. And one thing I was going to say was that, I agree with Tom's assessment, but you know, as the chairman of NYCHA, I go out about once a month. I go out to one of our developments or a couple of them in a single area and walk around, just sort of see what's going on and visit with people. And one of the fairly common experiences is you talk to people just around, or the tenant association president or whatever. One of the things that, not so much recently, but in the past, they would complain about how many migrants were in the neighborhood. You know, and this is folks who live in public housing are quite
because
poor.
they feel that the resources are being given to the migrants and not to them.
They're that, and also, I mean, frankly, they were worried about safety.
Yes.
Right or wrong, they were worried about safety. So it was not like, you know, it wasn't Group 5 that was sort of focused on this that necessarily. It was, you know, some of the 600,000 people that live in public housing.
Part of that problem is the media and Trump, you know, magnifying, you know, isolated incidents of crime. Right?
For sure, absolutely.
People fall for that.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, the one thing also that I was thinking about when we talk about subways, like one of the things that makes the city feel chaotic to me, or more chaotic than it has in the past, is fare beating, and how blatant it is, and how it's not just poor people. I see guys in suits jumping the turnstiles, and to me, it's so incredibly frustrating. I mean, the city, there are technological ways to fix this. France has done it. Other cities have done it. It's not brain surgery. The city started a fair fares program about 10 years ago, one that we advocated at my company for a while. And what I'm told is that not enough people are the city hasn't done enough outreach to get people to take advantage of it. The city has to do a better job of providing reduced fares, free fares for people who are below a certain limit, and everybody else has to pay. And there has to be fines for those people who pay. That to me is, you know, when you talk about broken windows, that's the biggest broken window right now, that and retail theft. And I think that's why people think the city's chaotic and not being managed.
All right, so let me end on this, which is with Jamie, which is a program that you not only care about but have led. So 86% support allowing NYCHA to use excess land to rebuild public housing and construct new affordable housing. How'd you feel about that, and explain what this actually means?
Yeah, so look, obviously that falls in the category, one of John's categories, that there's a lot of people that support it, so that's great. I think it probably has a lot to do with the fact that people overall feel the housing crisis. They feel the housing crisis. They realize what it is. I also took away from it that they're not interested in, you know, a Mamdani-esque solution, which is basically freeze rents,
Right.
because I just think that people understand that that's not the solution to the housing crisis. They realize that we have to develop and build. And one of the things that's happened in the last year or two is that we've had real victories on that side, which is unique to this era. We've had City of Yes pass. The rezonings have been quite successful. So I really do think that at the state level, national level, state level, and at the city level, there is a massive change in the overall attitude to
And
this.
what NYCHA is doing, which is really
right.
innovative, right?
And
With
so
Chelsea has
100%.
Maybe the first time anyone's ever used the words innovative and NYCHA.
There you go. Thank you. We're sea change.
Thank to the new chairman.
Sea change. There you go. Sea change. No, thanks to the management team. So, what we are doing at NYCHA is we're riding the wave, or I really think leading the charge on this. We are, you mentioned, Tom, in the Fulton Elliott Chelsea 4-block square development in Chelsea. We, along with our real estate partners at Related, are going to rebuild the entire development. The buildings are going to come down one at a time. We will move folks out, move them back into newly built public housing. First thing that's happened in the city since the 60s. And some of the freed up land, because we're underbuilt on our land, is going to be now rebuilt with mixed income housing. So we're going to get, the city's going to get new public housing for exactly the same people with vouchers, and then it's going to get net new several thousand units of new affordable housing.
Here's a provocative question.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that
And I should say, we're going to do that all over the city.
which is
by the way.
amazing,
So, yeah.
and then mayors have been trying that for years, but not succeeding because
Correct.
people at NYCHA didn't trust the mayors or the city. Is the fact that we have a black mayor partially responsible for the fact that NYCHA residents are now more trusting of the city?
I don't have a view. How about this? I don't have a view about that specific issue. I really do think, and this again comes from my having spent a lot of time out in the street, I think that what has happened in the last couple of years is that NYCHA has done some of that work, improving the housing by taking in outside capital. And there's enough of it now that people know it's been successful. And everybody knows somebody who lives in a brand new apartment that looks much better because we did that. There's also just been a general improvement in the operations of NYCHA. It's not the kind of improvement that if you saw it or you lived with it, you would feel like it was fantastic. But relative to how things have been, it is massive improvement. And people feel that.
And let me end it on there's a third, because I spent enough time with Jamie and his team on the NYCHA side, which is there's a lot of engagement, right? I mean, I think one thing that I would imagine all four of us have learned over our careers and lives is more than anything, people want to feel heard. Right? They want to know that they're being listened to. They want to know you're taking them seriously. You don't have to necessarily always agree with them, but they want that respect. And from what I have seen, Jamie, you have a team at NYCHA that gets that. And the more that people feel heard, the more that they are willing to then work with you on new ideas.
But this was John. I mean, this is John's. It goes right back to what John you said at the beginning. I mean, it doesn't seem that complicated, but somehow it doesn't seem. I don't know. Why doesn't that get across?
That is the issue. Like this, by the way, this particular the housing issue and some of the specific policies we're talking about now truly transcend each of these groups, okay? You have a minimum of 76% support, this last proposal we talked about, with a high of 93 support. It's I don't know if I've ever seen public policy that has such strong, and by the way, that was the second strongest, right?
Right.
That was a number two,
Right, yeah.
But it's probably statistically tied, with number one being, a process where you can more adeptly convert commercial to residential, right? This is a ready to go, I think, kind of platform for folks to let voters know that they hear them, right?
Being heard, I think, is the single biggest problem the Democratic Party has. That I think the reason why the Democratic Party lost in this presidential election is because the majority of this country felt like they had somebody who heard them.
Yeah.
And I think the Democrats need to heed that call.
Well, it wasn't quite a majority. Just so we know.
How do people learn more about the poll and see all the details?
Well, you can go to my widely trafficked website, which is, honestly and truly, I'm not even sure what the website is. You'll have to go to.
Why don't you take a guess?
I think it's probably jamesrubin.com. But more important to go to John Della Volpe's site.
I'm gonna put up on my website, SocialSphere.com, and I'll be posting on my Substack, JDV on Gen Z. I focus a lot on Gen Z, but clearly this is
Great
much
Substack,
bigger
by
than
the way.
that.
Great
Yeah, it is
Substack.
very
Really
good.
fascinating
Subscriber.
stuff.
Yeah, congratulations.
Cool, guys. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
This was
Thank
fun.
you. That was
Thank
fun.
you.
All right. Firewall is recorded at my bookstore, P&T Knitwear, located at 180 Orchard Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We'd love to hear from you with questions, feedbacks, or idea for a guest. Just email me at bradley@firewall.media or find me on LinkedIn. And to keep up with what's on my mind and my latest writing, please follow my new Substack at bradleytusk.substack.com. Thanks again for listening.